Yes, filming is more important than being in person. Now, go ahead, close it. Now, I'm just pointing something out about how we work in our society. Filming something, getting good pictures is more important than living and experiencing. Yeah, something's not right about that. That's why I think there's so much of a feeling of loneliness and cut-offness in society. Yeah. I'm going into my social commentary, but it's true, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so welcome everybody as we start our almost 3-week vacation with the Buddha. Yeah, exploring monastic life. This EML is very different than all the preceding ones. In the preceding ones, most of the people who came were not ordained, and I had signed up for the course. And this year, we had a lot of people sign up for the course, and then all of them but 2 people canceled. So this from people outside, some of you were already here. But yeah, so what to do? We always have the newly ordained attend the whole course too, because it's, when you ordain, you have to get used to a bunch of new things, and so it's a good way to do that. And then the seniors usually come for the Dharma talk in the morning. It wouldn't hurt them to do more discussion too. Okay, and so that's one thing. Then second thing is we all, at the beginning of a course, I like to, of course, meet with people the first morning of the course, because part of the course is teachings and discussion, and then another part is offering service together, because that's really part of being a monastic and expressing your wish to be of benefit to sentient beings. So we don't want to put people out in the forest the first morning before saying good morning. Okay, so that's why we're meeting this morning. So that is embodying another thing that you learn as a monastic, which is everything changes all the time. And you better learn to be flexible, because your schedule changes, everything changes all the time, because it's dependent on causes and conditions, and the conditions change, and so what we do changes. Yeah, and that can sometimes be very difficult for people. At the beginning of the Abbey, there were after the beginning of the Abbey, and when there were just 3 of us here, Venerable Tarpa, Venerable Semke, and me, it was easy. We would plan things for the day, or we thought we would share at breakfast time what we were doing, and then everything would change within a half an hour or an hour, and they were going, but I had my day planned out and I was going to get all this accomplished, and now the schedule's changed. Yeah. So, and anybody else who's come along since then have that problem? Yeah. Yeah, you think you're going to do one thing and then the schedule changes. So this is really pointing out something very important about the way our mind functions, which is we like security, we like predictability, we want to be in control and know what's happening so that there's no surprises. In fact, we live in a world where everything is dependent on causes and conditions. Causes change, conditions change. Yeah, they're changing moment by moment. We don't even see the the incremental, tiny changes. We see the big ones, but still our mind goes, wait a minute, how come that changed? I had my whole day planned out. Yeah. And sometimes I have my whole life planned out. Yeah. And then it doesn't turn out that way. Yeah. And this is telling us something about our grasping and how much our grasping creates suffering. And this isn't even the deepest level of grasping. This is a superficial level of grasping. Yeah. And then all of a sudden things are different and we have to reconfigure. Yeah. My teacher was very expert at teaching that. He didn't tell us that's what he was teaching us. He just did it. And so things would be scheduled for a certain time. We would all be there assembled. And he would come along sometime later. Okay. But then late, that's when at the monastery at Kopan, when his teacher was still alive. And so we had some kind of not always predictable schedule, but. And then when the older teacher passed away, the younger teacher, then he could do things the way he, kind of what suited him and his way best. And he was quite a practitioner, so he didn't need to sleep much. And so teachings would often be scheduled for 7 o'clock in the evening, and we would all be there. And we would continue to be there. And we would continue to be there. And maybe around 10:30 or 11 at night, he would come and the teaching would start. Okay, I'm a morning person. I don't even make it to 10:30 at night, unless I have to. Okay, but teachings would start then. And then he would go until about 3:30, 4 in the morning. And then he would start the dedication of merit. And he didn't just chant the 2 verses that we do, and, that's over in a minute. His dedication of merit took about an hour. And he would lead us through a whole meditation on dedicating the merit. And so he taught us, don't pay attention to the schedule. Things were supposed to start at 7 and end at 9, and no, that's not the way it happened. Okay, and if we look at our life isn't like that either, is it? Yeah. From that bit of training, I developed a little slogan that said, as soon as you have a plan, you know what won't happen. Yeah. And, and that was interesting with some of the people who didn't come to the EML. Their application, so much enthusiasm. It's like, we want to come, right? Wasn't it? So much enthusiasm. And then, whatever changed in their life. So, yeah. So we need to have our directions, the direction we want to go in, clear. But how our life unfolds, we need to have a lot of flexibility. Yeah, because we cannot control everything, can we? Yeah? Anybody here control everything? We try to. We try to control everything, but the world doesn't function like that. Yeah? And we're actually, in a state of constant change. So we can reject change, or we can accept change. Yeah, we can reject reality, or we can accept it. And here we're just talking about, some kind of conventional reality. We're not really talking about something deep, but it certainly is pointing out our grasping at. I want to predict. I want to know what's happening. I don't want any surprises. Yeah. Or if there's surprises, there's ones that I want. Yeah. Yeah. Not the surprises I don't want. When there's a change that I want, the change is fine. When there's a change I don't want, then there's a real upheaval. And you find that a lot when couples separate. Yeah, the person who leaves is fine. They wanted the change. The person who didn't leave is going, what in the world happened? Yeah. And so it's change, but if it's a change you want, fine. If it's a change you didn't want, freak out. Okay? So this is the more we can contemplate that and readjust our way of thinking, the easier life becomes. Because it's like change. Yeah, what else is new? Of course, I knew this was going to happen. I didn't know how the change would happen. Yeah, but it did. I mean, did any of you who are ordained, when you were young, did you think you would become a Buddhist monastic? Anybody here? Yeah. Okay, look how your life turned out. Did you, any of you, your parents want you to grow up to become a Buddhist monastic? No. Yeah. So things turn out quite differently than we planned and our parents planned. Yeah. Okay, so for the topics that we're going to discuss, I thought this course to go through a little bit of history. Yeah, the very first EML we did, which was, I don't know how many years ago, like 18, huh? Okay, '05. So that was 18 years ago. Yeah. Hmm? So, so that very first EML, I did a little bit about the Buddhist history and so on. And I haven't done that since. The subsequent EMLs haven't touched on that. And I think it's helpful to know a little bit about the evolution of the tradition and also how, the Buddha Dharma was developed over centuries, how different traditions began, and how the culture and climate and governmental structure and so many different things influenced how Buddhism was, developed in each country it went to and in each tradition. When I first ordained, I had the idea, and this was the way it was taught very much in the Tibetan tradition. I didn't try a lot of different things before. The first course I went to was Tibetan Buddhism, and that's what I stuck with, and those are still my teachers. Okay, so I didn't do the 31 flavors, sample everything variety. But the Tibetans, if you look, unlike many countries in Southeast and Eastern Asia, they were not colonized by the Westerners. Okay, neither was Thailand, Tibet, few other places weren't, but most of the others had Western colonizers and invaders who did various things in their countries. Some just took over the government, some kind of took over the resources and exported all the natural resources back to Europe, and did some not very nice things to the native people, to the people whose country it was. Anyway, the Tibetans hadn't had any contact with outsiders, not very much at all. There was Alexandra David Neal from the Theosophical Society, and Lama Govinda, and then what's his name, the Irish plumber? What? Yeah, Losang Rampa. Yeah. So Losang Rampa and Alexandra Devaneva especially made Tibetan Buddhism out to be all magical, mystical, and so on. Losang Rampa claimed to be a Tibetan who was familiar with everything. Actually, it was the original fake news. Not the original, there's a lot of fake news before that, but most of the world is fake news. Anyway, he was an Irish plumber, and then he just invented these far out tales about Tibet and, magic and all this kind of stuff. So the Tibetans, never having been colonized, never had people who came in and researched their Buddhism and discussed it from an anthropological viewpoint, from a sociological viewpoint, a historical viewpoint, nothing like this. And the Tibetans didn't have universities like Western universities. They had monasteries. That was the education system in Old Tibet. Yeah, and you got a really good education, not in the same things that they taught in Europe, but in the path to liberation. Yeah. So as a background for this, understanding Tibetan Buddhism, we have to be aware of that in the Tibetan mind, there wasn't this perspective of standing outside it and then observing how do things function. And so there was not the idea, Tibetans knew that before Buddhism came, they had a native religion called Bon, which was a shamanistic kind of religion. And then Tibetan Buddhism, the Indians brought Buddhism, and then it got acculturated into Tibet. And it conformed with Tibetan culture and style. And the Tibetans, of course, having their own culture beforehand, brought that culture into Buddhism. And so many of they were very, they really took Buddhism to heart, but they would take some of the old rituals from Bon and give them a Buddhist meaning, or give them a Buddhist way of doing the ritual. Yeah. And the Bon religion talked a lot, spirits and different realms of existence, and Buddhism does too, but not quite, I think, to the extent that that Bon did. Yeah. And so the Buddhists just adapted these things that were all around them anyway, and then gave them some kind of Buddhist meaning. When people like me came along, we thought, and the Tibetans felt like their teachings were the way it was expressed to us are the exact same teachings that the Buddha gave without any kind of change, including adapting to culture. And every Buddhist tradition presents itself as the original way that has not changed at all. And of course, none of them are like that. Yeah. But, I came in and, we were told there's all this stuff going on and, with different rituals and things like that. And I'm kind of puzzled by it. It wasn't stuff I immediately took in. But there was no system, they never presented this as, for example, the system of modes, okay, doing divinations. They have all sorts of ways of divinations. And this came from Bon, but then it was given Buddhist meaning and Buddhist deities who made the divination and so on. But it wasn't presented to us that way. I, in my ignorance, thought, this is exactly the way Buddhism was taught by the Buddha. Okay. And then later, when I started becoming familiar with other Buddhist traditions, I saw that they didn't do those things, but they did other things that the Tibetans didn't do that, were part that came from their traditional culture, like in China, ancestor worship. And ancestor worship got mixed in with Buddhism and was given Buddhist meanings. And nobody ever really talked about the difference between ancestor worship and Buddhism. Okay, and this happened in the Theravada tradition as well. They had. It's interesting there what happened with them because they were more in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And Colonel Alcott, I think he was British, in the 19th century, he went to Sri Lanka, and he was like the first British guy, Western guy, who was interested in that. And the Theravada tradition says we're the original ones. Okay, we have all the scriptures that the Buddha spoke exactly as he spoke them, with not one change. Okay, and so Alcott believed that. He brought that view back to Europe, and then the Western university people said, yeah, the Theravada tradition is the original Buddhism, and then they just took on what people in Sri Lanka said, which was the Mahayana tradition. That's all apocryphal, was made up. Yeah, the Buddha didn't really teach that. And they gave arguments, and, Alcott brought that view back. And that view is still, in many ways, strong in academia these days. Yeah, they haven't kind of changed it. So I think my main point, getting off on this tangent, was to study history, the history of the tradition. It gives you more of a background of different factors that influenced the Buddhism that you're practicing. Yeah, because you'll see that, in the different traditions, the teachings basically are the same, but the external appearance and often the way of practice differs according to culture and climate and so forth. Okay, and so those are things that we should not say, we do it this way. This is pure Buddhism. The other people who don't do it this way are wrong. Okay. You see this in every tradition, and it's super prominent in America with Christianity, is you have all these different branches of Christianity. And America, you don't agree with what your branch is teaching, well, you start your own version. Yeah. don't you? And so there's like so many different Christian traditions in this country for that reason. You know, the Southern, and I'm wondering if there's going to be more. The Southern Baptist Conference, I'm going off on a tangent. They they had previously had many women in the role of pastors in their churches. And they have many kinds of pastors, pastors for children, for teenagers, for social work, and then pastors that give the sermons. Anyway, somebody got it into his head that Jesus said that all the pastors should be men. And so the Southern Baptist Conference, just a month or two ago, said that all the female pastors were no longer, uh, they weren't, kosher pastors. And their churches were kicked out of the Southern Baptist Conference because their churches were not allowed to have female pastors. Okay, so I'm wondering if they're going to start a, non-Southern Baptist conference, or, a Northern Baptist conference, or a renegade. They'll have come up with another name of it. Yeah, but we just branch out and do things. And, so why is that happening in Christianity? Well, there's a backlash to women's lib now. And we see it all over in so many different areas of the country and different things happening. Um, yeah, so that's something, if you understand that, then you understand how traditions develop and why people say and believe the things they do, and then how things unfold as time goes on. Yeah. So that's why I thought to talk a little bit about Buddhist history. I'm not going to go into lots of details about this and that happened in this year and that year, but rather to give you more of a flavor of how things developed. And I don't know how long I'll talk about this. I don't have the whole course planned out, so we'll talk about it until we talk about something else. And, we'll branch out into, different topics that come from history. Okay, but before we get into the history of the tradition, I always like starting EML by telling the story of the Buddha, okay? And so the story of the Buddha, as recounted by all the Buddhist traditions, this is it. It is reality. There's no exaggeration at all. This is what actually happened. One of my friends who's a Theravada monk, we met in Singapore. We were the only two Ingis teaching there. This was many years ago. And he did some research and just wrote a book. What's the name of the book?
Footprints in the Dust.
Footprints in the Dust, yeah. So, which I highly recommend to you. And he did a lot of research about the culture at the time of the Buddha, and what really had happened. And, the birth story of the Buddha and things like that. He said, that many of these things were added to the scriptures later on, but now are taught as part of the original scriptures, okay? And I think you have that in every religion, It starts out, even if you transcribe word by word what the original person said, then people, they want to flesh it out. And so they add some of this, or they don't like that point, so they don't emphasize that one. So, this is what happens. I've met some young people in Singapore who say we want to get all the myth out of Buddhism, all these birth stories and things like that, Jataka tales. We want to get them out. They're not true. Yeah. But, okay, well, so that in one way, yes, that is a good point. You know, you don't want to teach as true something that maybe wasn't true. Okay. On the other hand, many of these stories, you know, about the Buddha's early life and so on, there's a meaning behind them. And they have inspired faith in people for centuries. Yeah. And so is it necessary to kick them all out? Or is it nice to kind of leave them in because they also give some room for the mind to expand and think in a broader way? Yeah. So that's a question, you know. We've had some discussions with these young Singaporeans about it. You know, we're going to get all this mythological stuff out, you know. But, okay, you know, can we hear it and see it as maybe having some truth but being exaggerated in one way or another, but it giving some space to our mind to maybe think in a broader aspect. Yeah. So it's a question. It's a question. Mm-hmm. Let me give you an example. Okay, well, maybe I should start telling the story of the Buddha's life as it's traditionally told, and then we'll come across some of those things. Yeah. So actually, it starts at the very beginning of the story. Yeah. Little background. The Buddha's India at the time of the Buddha's birth, which we don't know exactly. Okay, as much as some people say it's this date, you know, it's always a bit approximate. Some people say it's in the 6th century BC. Some people say maybe the 4th century or 5th century. We're not quite sure, okay? But in any case, that doesn't matter much unless you're writing a PhD about it, which we're not. But India was in a period of change at that time. It was an agricultural society, yeah, with little villages and people doing farming and raising cattle. But it was just starting to transition to a place where there were towns. And there were various little, they were called kingdoms, but it seems like there was a lot of different governmental styles at the time of the Buddha. Some were more kingdoms, some were maybe like fiefs, some were more like republics where they had councils and people voted. So it was a time of change, economic change and style of governance change. So as the story goes, the Buddha's family was a royal, you know, they were, his father was like the king of that particular area. That in itself is probably not so accurate in terms of how we think of kings these days. Maybe he was the leader, yeah, or a leader in the community, but not the king that like made every policy that, you know, or they would chop off your head. I think that only happened in Europe. Yeah. Europe really like, like cutting off people's heads. Amazing. Yeah. So, so it was probably a more of the start of a republic, maybe, and his father was maybe a prominent leader in it. But anyway, the story has more spiritual impact if we talk about it like his father was the king. Okay? Because when we think of kings and queens, we think of wealth, extravagance, getting anything you want, having servants wait on you hand and foot. It's much more sensuous or sensual than just thinking of the leader of a republic. So, and this plays a part in the story, that because when we come to the Buddha renouncing and leaving the kingdom, if he was just walking out of some kind of middle class place, nobody would care. But he was giving up, this whole big thing. Okay. But his birth, interestingly, so Jesus had a virgin birth, and Buddha, his mother had a dream that an elephant was entering into her side. Okay, and after that she became pregnant. Yeah. So you can think of it as symbolic. Elephants are powerful animals. Something special was happening, a very powerful to-be person was entering into her womb. When she was about to give birth, she, I guess the tradition at that time was the women left the community where they were living, left their parents' house, and went with some other women and gave birth there. So they went to a grove of forest, and she leaned up against a tree, and the baby came out. I think it came out of her side, didn't it? Same way with the elephant entered. Anyway, okay. And then the baby stood up, raised his hand, walked 7 steps, and said, I forgot. What did he say? I should have reviewed this. What? This is my last life in this world, something along that line. But he made that declaration, okay? Yeah. So he already knew how to speak, he knew how to walk. We don't see many babies with that kind of quality. Now you could say, well, that's just a myth. It would take that story out. It didn't really happen. But, for many people, the aspect of something miraculous that you cannot explain by our ordinary senses makes something more holy in a way, because when you're on a spiritual path, you're trying to exit from the world, the samsaric world we're in. So any signs of something already being outside, it's like, oh, that must be special. The Bible is littered with miracles. Is that being disrespectful? Littered with miracles. Yeah. But, even the Old Testament, so for example, my faith in Buddhism does not come because the Buddha, came out of his mother's side, stood up and made that proclamation. If it was miracles that inspired my faith, I would still be Jewish. I mean, who can beat parting the Red Sea? Come on. Who can beat that one? And a bush talking? Yeah? None of our bushes talk. Um, yeah? So, I mean, if that's what inspired faith, we could all stay with our own traditions, couldn't we? They all have miracles, because the idea of miracles is to inspire something out of the ordinary. Okay, so for some people that works. When you think of Buddhism as a world religion, not as people who all the time are serious practitioners, but who are lay people and have a religious aspect to your life, this kind of thing helps them. Yeah. So yeah. And so it's also really nice when we celebrate the Buddha's birth. In temples, they will usually have a statue of the Buddha as the baby with his hand up, making the proclamation that this is my last life. And then there's a big thing of water in front. And then we all go up and we scoop water and pour it on the Buddha, because, of course, you have to wash the baby when he's born. Yeah. And so that's a tradition in many temples, and it's a very sweet tradition. Some people, from the time they're really little and until their time, when they're old men and old women, every Vesak they come and, welcome the Buddha by pouring the water. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm willing to let those things stay in the tradition. Because it does serve a purpose, maybe not for me, but for other people. I mean, I still go up and, and pour the water on the Buddha. Why? Not because I believe that really happened, but because I'm making an offering. And it's a symbol for me of I have faith in the way the Buddha lived his life and in what he taught. Yeah, so that's a symbol for me. I don't, okay. So he was born, and then, they went back to the palace. What was interesting is my friend Venerable Dhammika, when he did research on this, because everybody had said, "Oh, come on, nobody has a baby coming out of their side." I mean, what happens? Has the baby come out? Do they have to sew you up? What? They didn't have cesarean rebirths from your side in those days or in our days. But he did some research, my friend, and he found out that actually at the time of the Buddha, many women gave birth standing up. Yeah, and so to go out of the town and hold on to a tree and give birth, not through your side, but normal birth, was a tradition. And, that's interesting to know. That's how that story kind of probably came to be and was exaggerated in a certain way. Yeah. In any case, the Buddha was given a royal education. Yeah. When he was just an infant, the father, his father, King Sudana, am I saying that right? Sudana. Anyway, his father called a fortune teller, okay, to come. There's a fancier name for fortune teller, soothsayer. Yeah, fortune teller is kind of a cheap name. Soothsayer is kind of, whoa. Interesting. It's the same with Jesus. The wise men came and made a prediction, right? Yeah. So same here with Buddha. So Buddha was 3 centuries earlier. So I don't know, maybe the Christians copied it. But anyway, the soothsayer said, your child will either become a king or will become a spiritual leader. Okay, so the father, being a worldly person, does he want his child to become a spiritual leader? Forget it. That's hocus pocus. So he wanted his son to take over the family business of running the kingdom. Yeah. So how many of you were expected in one way or another to kind of duplicate your parents' life in terms of their lifestyle or your career or something like that? Yeah, you had that. Yeah, so it's the same with the Buddha. So he was given this royal education and he excelled. He was the one that got all A's on his report card, and everybody thought he was going to grow up to be something great. He was educated to become the king, and just follow in his father's footsteps. And that was the tradition at that time. And we see that in one way or another, it still kind of exists now to, replicate our parents' life in one way or another. So, so he excelled in sports and, education and all these different things. Yeah. He had some unusual experiences as a child. One time he was sitting in a grove of trees and he just spontaneously went into deep states of samadhi, of concentration. Yeah, that were incredibly peaceful. He didn't know what was going on, but that just spontaneously happened when he was a very young child. There was another incident where his cousin Devadatta, who appears later on in the story too, his cousin Devadatta shot down a swan that was flying. And the Buddha, who at that time wasn't the Buddha according to the story, he was, Prince Gautama, a Prince Siddhartha. Yeah, Gautama was the clan name. Siddhartha was his personal name. Prince Siddhartha went and picked up the swan and nursed it back to health. And Devadatta said, this swan is mine. I was the one who shot it down. And Siddhartha said, no, it's mine. I'm the one who nursed it back to health. So the council in the village met to discuss this. And they decided, no, it's the one with compassion that gives life, not the one who killed the swan who gets to keep it. Yeah. So it's an early indication that here's a little kid who has compassion. Yeah. Okay, so then he grew up. Yeah, he's the model kid in every way, the kid that we were all supposed to be. But none of us were. But, maybe in our own area, we were. In our parents' eyes, we were the model kid, put it that way. Yeah. And you see that. I mean, for every parent, their kids are the most fantastic beings alive. Of course, until they get mad at us for disobeying them or something. But, okay, so he was the model kid. And it came time for him to get married. And so in those days, as in, many cultures now, it's arranged marriage because the marriage isn't just between two people who know each other. A marriage is a joining of two families. Okay. And so the kids just happen to be there, but it's the families. European history, how did they conduct diplomacy? Yeah, the princess of one country married the prince of another country, and then they had a political alliance. The kids had absolutely no choice in the matter. And even in India today, there's many arranged marriages. And if you if you read the classified section of any major Indian newspaper, they have a marriage classified section, Um, and even though Gandhi, tried to get them to leave aside caste, and I think castes are illegal in India, still the caste system, you know. So Brahmin boy, educated at Harvard, seeks beautiful, intelligent woman Brahmin woman for marriage. I mean, yeah, they have these. You're advertised in the newspaper. Yeah, so this kind of. I think they still have the old-fashioned matchmakers. Yeah, the yentas who who go around and that's their career. Yeah. So, and they do it by astrology and so forth. So, so he married Yasodhara, and of course he had many concubines. Yeah, so there were many concubines, and every evening, just they were singing and dancing, and they all had a good time, and and then Yasodhara had a son who was an infant, and so everything's going along just according to mom and dad. Well, his mother died right after he was born, so he was actually raised by his aunt, who became his stepmother, and his mother's sister. And she plays a figure. She's a big figure as the story goes on, too. So he got married, had a child, everything's going according to dad's plan. Yeah. And, but inside, Siddhartha's beginning to have some questions about life. And he's saying, because his father wouldn't let him leave the palace area, because his father knew that if he went out, he would get polluted by the world. So he was supposed to be brought up with the palace, everything wonderful that he wanted, and nothing that would ever jar his reality. Complete predictability, security, and control. Okay? So that's what Dad tried. It didn't work so well because Siddhartha was curious about the world. So he talked to his charioteer and convinced his charioteer to take him into town when nobody else in the family knew about it. Okay. And so he went into town 4 times this way. It's called the 4 messengers, because each time he learned something very important. The first time he went in, he saw a sick person. He had never seen a sick person before. Talk about being an overprotected child. Yeah, he had never seen a sick person. So he's saying to his charioteer, what in the world is this? And the charioteer explains, somebody who's sick, our body doesn't always function the way we would like it to. And this is what happens to it. And can you imagine being in your late teens, early 20s, and that's the first time you saw a sick person, and how shocking that would be to discover that you too had that potential to become ill after you've been raised in these perfect surroundings. So he was pretty shocked by that. Okay, went back to the palace, digested that experience. Then he went out again with his charioteer, and this time he saw an old person bent over, hobbling with his stick, okay, kind of like some of us are going towards, that all of us are going towards, Yeah. Oh, this hurts, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. Yeah. So he saw an old person, and again, he had no idea what it was. Asked his charioteer, who said, our body decays and it gets old, and happens to everybody. So the idea that these things happen to everybody, that nobody was immune from it, very shocking. So he went back, he digested that experience. He went out a third time, and this time, they're going along in the town or the village, and there's a corpse. And in India, I don't think so much now in the train stations, but when I first went to India in the early 70s, you would see corpses in the train station or wherever. Sick people, old people, corpses. They weren't all shut away like in our countries. So he saw a dead, corpse, and again asked his charioteer, what in the world is that? And his charioteer explained, everybody dies. What happens when you die? The charioteer didn't know. The common cultural view was that you reincarnated, okay, or you have rebirth. Yeah. So again, he was shocked. He went back. He thought about it. The fourth time he went into town, he saw a mendicant, a spiritual seeker. In those days, the spiritual seekers were wanderers who lived by alms. They wore rag clothes. They, lived. They walked around to different places. They lived very simply, did their spiritual practice. And there were a variety of different spiritual teachers teaching a variety of different things at that time. Anyway, he saw a mendicant and again asked the charioteer, what's that? And that the charioteer explained, that's somebody who is trying to find the way out of this circle of existence, this cycle of existence. Okay, so here we have the basic, when we talk about the Buddhist worldview, this is kind of the basic thing we're talking about, that because the big human question is, what is the meaning of my life? And it's because we all know death happens that we ask that question. Why am I here? What's the meaning? When I die, so what? What happens to me? What happens to the world? What's the effect of that? So talking about how we are reborn, and what we are reborn as is determined by our actions in previous lives, not just in one life, but beginningless lifetimes. And as long as we have ignorance that misapprehends the nature of reality, then we have all sorts of other afflictive mental states like attachment and greed and jealousy and anger and rage and those kinds of things. And because of that, this fundamental ignorance, we get reborn one life after another, after another, after another, after another, beginninglessly. Okay? And it's endless unless we get rid of the ignorance. Okay? So Siddhartha, he was very intrigued by that idea of a wandering mendicant and somebody trying to get out of this cycle of samsara, because it was really beginning to hit him that no matter whether you were rich or poor or famous or nobody knew about you or any of these things, everybody got sick and old and died. Everybody. Yeah, there were no passes. We couldn't apply to somebody, I don't want to get old and sick and die. Can I make an application? And you would skip me over this. This is just the nature of our life, because the fundamental cause of rebirth is this grasping at things as existing in a way that they don't. And then the karma, the actions we do under the influence of that kind of grasping and the afflictive mental states that arise due to it. So he thought, okay, there's something important here. I've got to explore it. And so he left in the middle of the night. His charioteer drove him away. He took off of all his royal garb, and his jewels. This is one reason why when we see the statue of Shakyamuni Buddha, he has long earlobes, because he had been wearing many jewels, and the jewels on his ears, the earrings, were so heavy that they stretched out his earlobes. Okay, so that's what the long earlobes represent, So he renounced that whole way, and then he began wandering to seek a teacher, because he knew he needed somebody else who knew more than him to guide him, that he couldn't make up the path himself because he didn't know what he was doing. Okay. So I always like, if we pause here in the sequence of the story, I always like to start EML telling this story, because in many ways, this first part of the story echoes our lives, in one way or another. I think most people were born and raised in middle-class families. Am I right? Some people may be wealthier families. None of us were, grew up in shelters, or maybe anybody here grew up in a shelter. Yeah. Okay. So we had protected lives. Yeah. We got an education. Yeah. We had after-school activities, and we learned a variety of different things. We had, from that perspective, a very, very good childhood. Of course, there's things going on in the family. We can't deny that. But at least from the material perspective, none of us were out on the streets. And even if you were out on the streets, there's many people in India, at that time, and now all over the world where people are living on the streets. Anyway, so in that way, it kind of parallels the Buddhist story. We were born into a family and had maybe not everything we wanted, because as kids we wanted more and better. We wanted what all the other kids had. And somehow they always had more than we did. Yeah, did you notice that? Yeah, the other kids always had more. And they had the new style things that we wanted. And we had to pester mom and dad until we got what we wanted. Or until they told us in no uncertain terms that you're not getting that, and just be quiet. Okay. But then also, so we grew up. Some of us were better students than others, but whether you're a good student or a bad student, it's not really a measure of your intelligence. It's a measure of your conditioning and your effort. Yeah, I think the teachers in this room would agree with that. Yeah. Sometimes you had very bright kids who just didn't perform well in school. School was not their thing. Yeah. And then you had other kids who weren't so bright, but they worked really hard. And you had everything in between. So, we were acculturated in the traditional way. Yeah, put it that way. And we grew up with the idea of having a career. And, what did your parents want for you? Grow up, get married, have babies, yeah, and support them when they're old. Yeah, more or less. Now the country has Social Security, so the emphasis on supporting your parents when they're old isn't quite the same way as it was before the New Deal. But there is still some of that, yeah. And then all of us, sometime in our teenage years, began to question things, didn't we? Yeah. When you were a teenager, you started questioning. Yeah. And did you always do what your parents wanted you to do? Or did you sneak out sometimes too without telling your parents where you were going and what you were doing? Yeah. Yeah. So it parallels the Buddha's life. He was curious. He wanted to learn about life. Mom and dad wouldn't let him out, so he snuck out. Mm-hmm. We did the same thing, similarly. Yeah, we didn't have a charioteer to take us out. Yeah, we just said, "Oh, I'm going wherever we said we were going," and then we went with our friends wherever our friends were going. Yeah, but we learned about life that way. We learned about life, and then just as when the Buddha heard about the wandering mendicant and seeking some meaning for life. Yeah, at some point in our lives too, we began seeking meaning. What's the purpose of this all? Yeah. I mean, I remember quite clearly and it was for me like a big existential thing. I mean, I was in years of existential crisis, kind of saying, what's the meaning? What am I doing? I didn't want to replicate my parents' life, even though that's what everybody expected me to do. Yeah. So my point here in telling the story is for us to see that our own upbringing, our own spiritual journey has some of the same elements as the Buddhists did. Yeah. And that this is something universal. Yeah. When we were young, we may have felt, oh, I'm the only person who thinks like this. Yeah. How many of you felt when you were younger, I'm the only person who thinks like my parents don't understand me. Some of my friends understand me if I go out and drink and drug with them, but when I talk about what's really going inside, some of them aren't quite as interested. Some of them are. I had great discussions with some friends. But, in terms of my family, my goodness, no, you never talked about spiritual things. And so just for us to see, this, we may have felt very alone in our lives at that part in our lives, but actually this is something that many people experience. It's not uncommon. And that I think that we were very fortunate that this spiritual questioning and spiritual longing was so strong in us that we took action and we started to explore and learn. Yeah. And I think that's a part of us that is very precious and that we need to respect in ourselves. Yeah. So I think, those times when you start to get down on yourself, yeah, you don't need to, give yourself some self-compassion. But but you can respect your own spiritual yearning and spiritual inquiry, and the fact that you set out to explore it, and you didn't just buy in to the typical way you're supposed to live, which in America is to be an individual within conforming to certain things. Yeah, figure that one out. You're supposed to rebel in a very conforming way. We didn't do that. Yeah. We decided to look for something else, for something with a deeper meaning. And I think that's really something to respect very much in ourselves. Yeah. And something to respect very much in each other. And so this kind of understanding that we've all had, that kind of yearning and that seeking, it bonds us together as a community of people where we know other people understand us. Yeah. Sometimes you go back to your family and it's like, it's very, anybody have that experience? It's like we're living very different lives and they don't know me, they don't understand me, at least on a meaningful level. They know on the superficial level and they love me, but what's really going on inside, they don't understand that. They may not be interested. Some people have parents that are interested and that turn them, support them in going this direction. But just to see this is part of the journey. Yeah. Okay. So let's just pause here before we haven't gone through the whole Buddhist story, but I just want to pause and leave some time for questions. If you have something, yeah.
In this story, I've seen that people really get stuck on the fact that Prince Siddhartha would leave his wife and child, and how could he do that? That isn't compassionate. Mm-hmm. And I guess I have the way that it makes sense to me, but how might you, for when people are stuck on that, how do you guide
Buddha
them?
He was a deadbeat dad. Yeah, I heard that said. Buddha was just a deadbeat dad. He abandoned his kid. He has abandoned his wife. He didn't explain things to anybody. He just disappeared, and like that's not compassionate. What kind of. And then after he became a Buddha, then all these men of the Sakya clan left their families and ordained and became his followers. And so. Oh my goodness, he started a whole movement of deadbeat dads. Yeah, what's going on here? How come he couldn't he have done it differently? Okay, couldn't he? We hear this so often. Couldn't he have stayed with his family and done the same thing? Yeah. Why did he have to leave his family? He could have stayed with them, been a loving parent, been a loving husband, run the kingdom in a loving way, and then he wouldn't have upset all those people, and what he's doing would make a lot more sense to us. Okay, so of course the people who see things like that, they don't have the Buddhist worldview. They have the worldview of there's one lifetime. Okay, and after that lifetime, some people say there's just nothing, you vanish. Or other people, and this is pervasive to many cultures, everybody goes to some kind of idyllic place where you don't have the aging, sickness, and death and other problems of this life. And have you ever seen, well, of course we've seen, that every person we like goes to heaven, and every person we don't like is going to hell. Have you never noticed that? Yeah. It doesn't really matter what they do. It matters whether we approve of what they do or don't approve of what they do. Yeah. So, many people, this is the way they see life. They don't think about, the word karma to them is like, what does that mean? That's some kind of Eastern superstition. Rebirth, nobody can prove it. It doesn't really exist. Yeah, but we're all going to heaven. Yeah, isn't that a form of rebirth? Or after this life, there's just nothing. You cease existing. Yeah, that's fine to say until you are actively dying, and then your beliefs change. Yeah. So this is in terms of upsetting our own mind and making us feel that people don't understand us or people are biased against our faith. It doesn't need to bother us. What else do you expect of worldly people, that they would think like this and say this? That's the way they've been raised. That's the way we were raised. I don't know about you, but I went through, when I was a kid, I was taught God existed. Yeah, so I went through that. Then I decided God was a conspiracy theory. And, I adopted the scientific view. And, after we die, there's nothing, period. Lived that for a while. That didn't do any good. Yeah. But so I understand how people think like that, because I went through that. It's not surprising. Yeah. What we're thinking is more surprising, I think. Okay. So don't let it rattle you. How do you respond when people do that? What I've learned, because people have all sorts of misunderstandings about Buddhism, and how you respond depends on the person and depends on your assessment of how open that person is. When the person is not very open to new ideas, it doesn't do very much good to explain things to them. Yeah. Yeah. And especially if everybody knows I happen to have the karma to sit next to evangelical Christians on long plane flights, and if you try and tell them that, they misunderstand Buddhism and that maybe their worldview could be adjusted a bit, they can't hear it, They've been told this is the truth and you do not deviate from that. If you deviate from this, you're going to hell. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. Maybe inflation, you would have collected $1,000. You don't do it, you go straight to hell. Okay. So it doesn't do much good, you know. You just, then with those people, what I emphasize is I kind of change the subject in some way if I think that they aren't open, and I'll say, well, you know, Buddha had a different way of expressing love and compassion, you know. Or I would say, well, Jesus also didn't get married. Yeah, he didn't have his 2.5 kids. He didn't get a job. He disappeared for how many years? 12 years? Something like that. Nobody knew where he was. Mom and dad are freaking out. They've called every single police department in the world saying, my kid is missing. Yeah, for 12 years, nobody knew where he was. That's part of his story, isn't it? There seems to be some indications that he may have gone to India during that time. Yeah, and there's people who've done research on that. So if there's people, you know, I say, you know, I point out the similarities between Buddha's life and Jesus's life, if these people are Christian, you know. If not, then whatever they believe in, you point out similarities in terms of the life of the founder, but also just in terms of the basic beliefs. Yeah. So, yeah, the Buddha, and I changed the subject, you know, the Buddha taught about love and compassion and encouraged that. And he went into areas where people were having wars and he taught them compassion. And, you know, this is something that's a prominent uh, principle that everybody is advocated to practice in every single world religion. So Buddhism isn't that different. So I'll say that. You just kind of change the subject and talk about what's similar. For people who are very set in their ideas, they are not curious, and they want to force you to accept what they believe, I just kind of leave it. It doesn't, they're not open for discussion. Yeah. Then there's other people you meet who are really, they may say that too, you know, why did the Buddha have to leave? But they're curious, you know, why? What was behind that? Why is this part of his biography? So then I might still point out the similarities in the religions, but I could say, well, the Buddha saw that if he stayed in the family life and did everything that his parents wanted him to do, his impact, the impact of his teaching, would not have been very great. Yeah, he wouldn't have attained awakening. He wouldn't have taught for 45 years all over India. And so, you know, this was his path, and to cut the attachment and the bondage and the involvement in family drama, this is what he decided to do because his spiritual yearnings were that strong. And there's, you know, there's so many. I mean, how many the Christian saints, I don't know much about them. Were any of them married and then they left their kids and their family? Most, no.
Some of the noble women
Some of the,
walked away from.
okay, yeah. But aside from them, no. So this is not something unusual in life for spiritual seekers. Yeah. And then you can even explain, well, even nowadays, for people who aren't spiritual seekers, many people choose not to get married and not to have kids for a variety of reasons. You know, some people say climate change. I don't want to bring a child into this world when we're faced with climate change. Yeah. You know, in Catholicism, the orders of monks and nuns and priests are really declining especially for women, because now they can, if they want to get an education, they don't have to become a nun to get an education. They can get an education in a secular way. You know, in old times, if you were a woman and you didn't want to have kids and you wanted to have an education and a career, the only way to do it was to become a Catholic nun. Yeah, and that's why many people, ordained. So, so for people who you can see are curious and want to understand, then you may talk about your own experience. And I don't know about everybody else's experience, but in terms of myself, once I had met the Buddha Dharma, which in my assessment was really made sense and pointed out the meaning and purpose in my life and what was valuable in my life, I saw that if I remained married, I could not follow that path. Why? Because when you're married, and especially when you have kids, your life is totally, what you do, you are a servant to your family, and they come first, and, you have to have, both parents have to work nowadays to be able to support kids. And then you have all your duties at home, and you have your social life, and you have everything that your parents want you to do and expect you to do. And if you try and if you take that all on and want that to be your life, how are you going to have the time to start to overcome your attachment and your anger when you're fully immersed in a life of attachment and anger? Yeah, because that's what lay life is. You're attached to your friends and family, and you need possessions to make them happy and support them. Yeah, you need a good reputation. You're attached to all that. Anything that interferes with that, you get angry at. How and those are the two of the three poisons. Yeah. So how do you overcome that when you're living in the midst of it and you don't have a strong mind? It's like somebody who wants to become a doctor. Let's say that, you're a kid and you want to be a surgeon. You think, oh my goodness, I could really help so many people if I could do surgery and, take out the different things that are plaguing them and heal them. And then you just go out to the grocery store and you buy a knife and you start cutting. You practice on the dog and then maybe on your sibling. And, that's no way to become a doctor and a surgeon. Yeah. Yeah. What do you have to do? You have to leave that environment and immerse yourself in medical school and residency and all this stuff for how many years? You don't get done being trained until you're 30 years old. Yeah, so it's the same thing. If you want to specialize in something, you have to put your energy in that direction. You can't just go out and do it. So, you were a physicist, you know that. You had to go to graduate school, and then you had to write papers that got published and be a professor. And, if you want to establish yourself, whatever your worldly career is, it takes a lot of time and energy, and you're very attached to doing that. That becomes the meaning of your life. Yeah. And then what do? All your spiritual yearning, you suppress. You shove it down. You say, that's not important. That was just my teenage, crisis. But now I know what I'm doing in my life. Yeah. And that kind of works well until things don't go the way you want. Yeah, because you had your whole ideal, perfect lay life laid out in your mind. Yeah, yeah. We all grew up with, you know, Cinderella and Prince Charming and, Princess whoever it was. And, we all grew up with certain fairy tales, which they told us weren't true, but we were still supposed to get the main point. Yeah. And how can you live that fairy tale and tame your afflictions? Yeah. Yeah, we have to get rid of that fairy tale mind. Because the fairy tale, everything, remember, how does every fairy tale end? Yeah, they live happily ever after. So you're supposed to do what your parents set out, and then you live happily ever after. Yeah. See, was it you? You were telling me that somebody did some cartoon series or something where they did what actually happens instead of the living happily ever after. That wasn't you? It was you. Okay. It was a musical. Tell the story. Okay. Sorry. I got
been a long time since I saw it, but there is a musical called Into the Woods, and it's a compilation of so many different fairy tales put together. And the first act is the fairy tales playing out as they usually are told. And then the second act, everything falls apart. People fall in love with each other that shouldn't be falling in love with each other, and people die, and it just goes haywire. Yeah. That's what really happens.
Yeah, it's what really happens. You have your fairy tale living happily ever after, and then it falls apart. Yeah. Or you get fed up with it, or whatever happens. Yeah. So, yeah, that's. I think we should watch that. Yeah, see, see if you could find it. It's a good EML movie because, yeah, because I don't know about the rest of you, but those fairy tales, even though I didn't believe them, they went in very deep, and I have to exert a lot of energy to really consistently go through those fairy tales, and this is not true. This is not, things are impermanent. Things do not turn out this way. You do not live happily ever after. Prince Charming doesn't show up on time, or he shows up and then he leaves, or he shows up and then you find out he's drunk. And then, it never happens the way the fairy tale does. Yeah. But they put, fairy tales, when you're little kids, that they inculcate things. A lot of, what we now call conspiracy theories. Yeah, isn't it? It's fairy tale based. It may have some good points, like Little Red Riding Hood. You should really tell the truth. Yeah. Wasn't she? I forget. It was the one about no, it was a boy who cried wolf. What did Little Red Riding Hood do? She what? So, but yeah, but that was a wolf too. So do we have two wolves? Am I getting? Oh, so sorry, I got my fairy tales. So there's the boy who called wolf, and then there's Little Red Riding Hood, whose grandma was a wolf. What happened? I can't remember. The wolf ate her grandma and then wore the grandma's clothes. And so how did that end happily ever after? What happened? Then what?
The woodcutter killed the wolf. The woodcutter cut the stump.
Oh, and then she married the wolf cutter. The woodcutter. No? She's got to get married at the end, you know? I mean, they say that is your big day as a woman, getting married. I mean, that's the way it is nowadays, too. That's when your life has meaning. For the 1 minute that you walk down that aisle and everybody goes, wow, isn't she beautiful? That is the epitome of meaning of your life. That's what these fairy tales teach us. So what happened to Little Red Riding Hood?
Grandma came out like a wolf's stomach.
Her grandma came out.
The wolf's stomach. The woodcutter killed the wolf,
Yeah.
opened up his stomach, and the grandma came out alive. So she was reunited with the grandma.
Oh, okay. But her grandma didn't want her to get married? Or that was the happily ever after that she was reunited?
It's a story about abuse.
Oh.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a story about abuse. Huh? Yeah. But most of the other ones, kind of, yeah, that's how they ended, you know. That happened. Yeah. Which is not the way life happens at all. Yeah. You know, in Indian weddings now, the way they actually do it, and they did this, I was reading in an Indian couple in California got married at a hotel, but the groom rides in on a white horse. Yeah. That's if you're a wealthy family, you know, and he's decked out. Have you ever seen pictures of Indian weddings? They're big deals. Big deals. He spent a lot of money on them, you know, and everybody's decked out. They go on for days and days. If you're trying to meditate and there's an Indian village across the valley, yeah, you know when there's a wedding going on. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, does that answer your question? Okay. Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
I did want to share that in the interfaith group that I've been going to, part of what I introduced in the beginning was for us to share where our spiritual practices was from the time that we had met the previous month. How's the practice going with life? And this past week, we spent over an hour, the three of them, just talking about their child and their grandchildren. On, just the grandchild's coming. I've got to get cardboard boxes because he likes to build things. We're going to do pots. We're going to teach him how to do this. And one woman's daughter just graduated from George Washington University, and she's over the moon about her daughter. So there was nothing about their spiritual. We came back around. We came back around the second time, but it wasn't about their internal life experience. It was about family and about where the joy comes from.
Yeah.
And then you find out later on that there's some angst in the internal world. One's her mother's dying, the other one's got, difficulties with other things, but that's in here. And so to bring it back around to see that that's where the default is. Yeah. The grandchildren, the daughter who's succeeding where she might not have done, and so it's very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done interfaith groups and similar kind of things. And I remember in the women's movement when there were consciousness raising sessions. I wanted to, remember those? Yeah, I wanted to raise my consciousness. And I was with a group of people and all they did was talk about their relationships with their boyfriends and husbands. And because that was the meaning of life. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Tim.
I just wanted to share that with when I started learning about Buddhism, all this time, I thought that the Buddha was the one who had identified that we're in this cycle of rebirth, had identified karma, and started teaching that Nirvana was a possibility. It wasn't until just recently that I learned that all those ideas were already present of rebirth and karma, and that there were people trying to reach nirvana, and all these teachers who said that this is how to do it. I didn't realize that those were already a thing. I thought that the Buddha was the original teacher of this.
Yeah. The Buddha explained those things in a slightly different way than some of the other people did, but that general belief, yes, was very common at his time. Yeah.